Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Good Enough Chats. My name's Dan Bauscher, and today I'm joined by Mark, who I will ask to introduce himself to you very shortly. But before I do that, I just wanted to explain, for the benefit of anybody who hasn't seen one of these shows before, how it's structured and why it's structured like it is, because I think that's really important to kind of explain that to first-time viewers. So in essence, this conversation is built around the same 5 questions every single time we have one of these chats. The guest sees these questions in advance, so they know what's coming. On the flip side of that, I don't know what's coming in terms of their responses to them. So the 5 questions allow us to kind of have a structure to it and give the guest the chance to prepare themselves for what they want to say. But it is an unscripted chat and conversation. So if Mark starts to talk about things that I would like to explore a bit further, there will be additional questions and different paths that I may travel down with him. But if at any point we go into territory that Mark's not comfortable talking about, all he's got to do is tell me, and we'll reset and we'll go back to the 5 core questions that we're going to work our way through. All of that really matters because I think this is a tough thing for some people to do. This is going to make them vulnerable. It's going to make people emotional, and all of this helps to give them, I guess, as much sense of control and security as they can possibly have going into this discussion. So without further ado, and on that basis, Mark, please could you briefly introduce yourself, where you live, what you do, shoe size, favorite drink at a coffee shop, whatever you want to add into details.
Well, there you go. This is where I ramble and go off. I'm size 9, as it happens.
Excellent.
Yeah, so I'm Mark Dodds, and I use J because it's easy to find a very common name on the internet. And I've got a background in all kinds of things, really, which come as a result. I now know of my being ADHD as quite a grown up. So when I say a wide-ranging background, but the substantial amount of it as an adult has been involved in hospitality and working in the pub industry, and which is the area of my life which allowed my mental health issues to flourish, because of the pressures I experienced being a publican, owning a tied lease on a pub in London, and yeah, and so I've always been interested in mental health issues. I think partly because my mum and dad were both teachers, and I avoided being a teacher because I saw them working so hard and being so diligent about everything they did, and I felt if I become a teacher, I will be like that. So I decided to choose careers where you have to work even harder and get even less reward. But kind of picked up some of the educator's role as a result of that, and somehow I've always been very self-reflective on my the way I respond to things, and so anyway, I come here as someone who's very interested in mental health generally. The summary of my experience is I think that we live in a society, George Monbiot characterizes this very well, that's basically governed by psychopaths, and while we are basically empaths, humans are built for empathy, and society channels us into areas of behavior that aren't comfortable to us. And I think we're all under huge pressure, and to summarize that bit, that if you don't have mental health issues, you need to be worried about what you need to be worried about what you're doing, because there's something wrong.
Yeah.
Unless your life is just wonderful and abundant, and you just happen to slot into something creative that really feeds your every bit of existence. Don't know whether I've probably rambled a bit there. So I'm a licensee, unemployed, very interested in mental health altogether.
Yeah, thank you.
And being open. Yeah.
Thank you. And I think that's that's what the Good Enough Chats conversation is all about. Is about helping people that that might be struggling or starting to struggle to realize quite how normal it is to face these challenges. And the more people, especially blokes, the more blokes are kind of exposed to open, honest conversations about mental health and things people have been to and struggles they've had, things they found that have worked for them or didn't work for them along the way, the better the chances that people can do something constructive about it.
Yeah.
So, you know, you mentioned there a few things about your kind of publican experience. Why is now, in your view, why is now the time for you to come forward and talk about your experience?
No, that's interesting. I think it's partly because generally now is the time for people to be doing this. You know, I like in the evolution of the species. I don't want to sound too melodramatic about that, but I think you know, the Western, you know, I have not talked about this in this framework, but the sort of Judeo-Christian Western dominant way of thought that we're familiar with. There's a whole other planet doesn't have our kind of thinking, where this kind of psychology is a different thing, I'm sure. But why is mental health the big issue now? The last 30, 40 years of our experience, it's an increasing problem all over the Western world and with men and so on. And we're still essentially, I think, as a species, we're unraveling how we are as people and as societies, and historically we've largely grown up in societies where there've been very strong leaders, kings, monarchs, whatever, or dictators and so on. And we kind of expect in our cultural DNA to be told what to do. Yeah, it's a very broad summary. Within that, there's loads of flexibility. And if you don't fit into this narrative, you come across problems wherever you are, man, woman, whatever. And then there's also the man-woman issue. How do men and women relate to each other? And for me particularly, I've spent my entire okay. So my parents were educators. My mother was Quaker. My dad was Methodist. When I was very young, when I was 3 months old, they moved to Nigeria and taught in a women's seminary there. And this is my very early childhood. I don't remember very much of it at all. And came back to England when I was 5. And the story I have about that was that we came back to England when I was 5 because my mum had recurring malaria and it was very serious and she might die. But it also coincided with my going to school, at primary school. And I went into the second term of the first year of junior school at a state junior school in Newcastle called Gosford Avenue, and I think I had culture shock then, which I don't really remember clearly any of this, but my engagement with England, very much with England rather than Britain, but my lived experience, was that I felt alien here since I can remember. And I always put that down to having my earliest experiences abroad. And incidentally, through my life, where I've worked, wherever I've gone, wherever I've met people, I'm quite a gregarious person. I've gravitated having friendships with people who, turns out, have grown up outside of England as well, and somehow that affects our attraction to each other, men and women. This is, I mean, it's not a hard and fast rule, but these are things I've just been aware of, and I've always felt as I'm a bystander in England, watching what goes on. And a very early memory, again, I'm sorry if I'm going off here, but these I've got these punctuated narratives, these things which punctuate my life narrative, which are really seminal moments of kind of revelation. Although at the time I did not realize these were seminal moments of revelation. And I had a family of friends who lived across the road from where I grew up in Forest Hall, who were Catholic. I'm an only child, and there were 6 children in that family, and they were really, I have very warm feelings of them as a family, and I starting to feel very emotional, and because they were 6 and I was 1, it was a very big difference in the way we were as a family, and I used to do a lot of things with them. We went to the cinema, and my recollection is it was a double bill. I may have got this wrong, but I think it was a double bill really long one of Wizard of Oz and Tarzan of the Apes. And so we went to the cinema in Newcastle, which was full of smoke and dark and so on, and it was crowded, full of people, men smoking cigars. I mean, it was really odd to me. I'd never seen anything like this. And at some point, the national sorry, I'm laughing. At some point, the national anthem came on. I didn't know what the national anthem was, and everybody stood up around me, and I was just completely baffled by what was going on. And people behind me were prodding me. You know, someone behind me was prodding me, and somebody to the left was prodding me as well. And they were going like this, you know. And I stood up, and he said, "It's the national anthem." And then we all sang this. Well, they all sang this national anthem, and I'm being serious. I must have been 6 or 7, and I thought everyone was insane. I just thought they were completely mad. And then I listened to the words of the national anthem, and it didn't mean anything to me. But I gathered it's to do with the Queen. You know, I wasn't daft, but this entire normal behaviour, which I'd never witnessed before, was like a metaphor for the way I felt about a lot of the stuff around me,
Yeah.
um, and it made me grow up through my entire life, through school, adulthood, college, and everything, with a little bit of thinking you're a bit like a roving documentary camera watching what's going on with some sort of objective distance from all
Yeah.
this madness.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
That's
No,
really interesting.
yeah, I mean, really, I've always framed my existence in that way, and I'm also I'm sorry, I'm stammering. I do lots of things, and I think my parents encourage me to do whatever I wish to do, and in a very unconditional, love, supportive way, right through my entire life. And I ended up, when I say ended up, I'm still here. I ended up in between 2017 and 2022 caring for them in in the last years of their lives. So I became their full-time carer, which was an amazing experience in itself. But they were still, up to that point, still looking after me as a person in his late 50s and 60s. You know, it was a really, really lovely relationship I had with. They were really good people, and so along the way, I've been able to explore things, I think, which lots of people haven't had the chance to do because they haven't had the luxury of being able to make decisions outside the framework. You've got to stick at this job and so on. So I've had a history of leaving jobs when I've done really well and found myself getting frustrated by the reality of being in management or having or talking to a board about things that didn't square with my kind of holistic view of the way stuff should be done. And I'm getting to the point, really, I'm getting to the point. And I've realized in the last 2 years that I'm ADHD. And this is what's powered my entire life. And I've been able to do all kinds of interesting things and do really quite well in them. And then when I've got really good at what I do, stop it and do something else. And so there's been three things going on. One is I've had that experience and realized, well, now I'm in this position where I'm the general manager of a nightclub, or I'm a maitre d' in a restaurant, or I'm the chair of an organization. There are a whole bunch of things I've done where I've succeeded really quite quickly, and then I think probably got bored and decided to move on. But at the time, there's been something which has made me think I can't. There's something more important that needs to be done. That my attention will be better paid. Yeah, that my attention would be better focusing in this area now because I've learned this stuff and now I can move on and do this. So when I look back at my CV, I've got this completely mad CV, really, which is a result of ADHD and
Yeah.
having parents who are very supportive. And so what makes me particularly interesting about what you're doing is my understanding. I'm 65 now, and I'm going to be retired. I'm retirement age next month, and it's taken me this long to understand myself. And I'm not at no stage am I claiming I've had a terrible life. I could say materially I've had problems because I don't have any assets or income at the moment. But there are reasons for that because I've left every job I've ever been in, or I fought the man and
Yeah.
stuff like this. But in terms of the mental health stuff, it's understanding that I have and it's not a condition, it's a way of it's a way of being.
Yeah.
It's my way of being ADHD has fueled everything I've ever done. It's been a kind of superpower without my realizing it. And in the last year, having had a few mental breakdowns in my time. I've had mental breakdowns this year, which have been like a series of rolling revelations of my own self, having flashbacks in this context of ADHD, and having read a book called ADHD 2.0, which is incredibly good. Realizing that the key moments of my life when I've made these decisions to change career or move on, I've been motivated by my behavior tendencies rather than by my conscious intellectual engagement with what I'm doing, even though at the time I've been entirely consciously engaged with what I was doing. But if I'd understood that my ADHD tendencies made me feel like and think and interpret things this way, there are certain things, and this is without regret, because I've done what I've done, and I know I can't change that. And I'm getting emotional now. There are key times in my life. If I'd understood my behavioral framework, I would have made different decisions, which might not have harmed me so much, because I've made decisions which have which I've realized were very risky, and to summarize those, they've tended to be bumping up against authority at quite a substantial level, and thinking essentially this is morally wrong. This behavioral framework I'm bumping up against is morally wrong. I will not become part of that, and either challenging it or leaving it. And it's always harmed me financially. And and I've come to understand this all in the last year or two. It's been about 4 years of this ADHD. I haven't got an official diagnosis, because it's been 2.5 years now. I've been waiting for a diagnosis, but I have no doubt. And I think broadly, huge numbers of people are ADHD. Huge numbers of people are neurodiverse. And if we can understand that we may be neurodiverse, I mean, even the labels cause problems. We can understand that we're not in this scaffolding framework that is rigid, conventional society. You've got to get on this path, career, education, or career or job, house, all the conventional stuff. If you don't have to fit into those things, you can be yourself and not feel bad about being yourself. Because if you don't fit into this linear framework, you're an outlier. You're seen as a weirdo. You're seen as a naive person, or a disruptor, and things like this. And to the extent that in the last 20 years, particularly in England, I think if you speak honestly what you see going on around you, you're regarded as a troublemaker. Yeah.
I think there's a lot in what you said there that is going to resonate with people. I'd like to pause on that thought for now, and we'll come back to some of this, I guess, the specific instances and the specific instances that you've had. But to help give us all sort of a bit of context, how has your last week been in terms of your
my last week has been really good, actually. And I think this process of this realization process, this difficult thing to describe, really, this understanding of ADHD. I don't want to overemphasize this, but in a sense, I don't think it's possible I can't think of the words. I think it's so important. I went through this period, particularly earlier this year, of having when I was absolutely clear that I have ADHD. I started having flashbacks at points in my life which were very emotional. I found myself crying at a computer. I think I told you when we first met. And this, and I know myself well enough to think there's something, Mark, there's something going on here. You're just bursting into tears. You're feeling extremely emotional about this kind of stuff. What on earth is going on? And it was my grieving for myself as a younger person, not realizing the frustrations I was facing up to were driven by my nature rather than just the societal framework around me. I thought I was fighting against the societal framework, but actually it was my innate behavioral stuff, which made me feel very determined and so on. And parallel with that, I've got two sons who are now 24 and 22, and who have been going through similar stuff. And I'm pretty confident they're both ADHD in the way they engage with life. And because I've got a very strong dialogue with both of them, and that feeds back to me learning about myself. So this last week, I've been feeling that I can notice this now. These are not things that are like, oh, this is a moment where I behave like this normally, and I'm behaving like this differently now. I'm behaving in this situation differently now. It's a kind of rolling understanding. But as I encounter a moment, I think you're dealing with this differently now than you would do through your entire life. And that is because I've got an understanding of myself better. I mean, this is, this is very emotional because, I didn't expect, I want to be open and honest. I didn't expect to be feeling this emotional about it as I am right now. But this last week, and it's like a wedge thing. It's getting to a point at which I feel as though I know myself better than I've ever done before, and that it's okay to be honest and open about the things that I understand and know. And I've got my crazy CV has led me to have a huge knowledge of all kinds of stuff that many people don't get the chance to experience. And I'm not I'm not an expert in everything. I'm an expert in the area of pubs, but I've got a lot of good experience that give me a lot of insight in a holistic way to the way society's malfunctioning and the way people get a raw deal. And right up to global, it's a global thing. I think that my experience has brought me to, and for the first time in my life now, just a month before I get my state pension, I'm beginning to think, well, actually now I'm all right, and I understand myself, and it's good. And this last week, there's been a bunch of revelations, with moments where I've actually felt very good about myself, instead of feeling I'm like, oh, that's good.
Yeah.
That's good. Yeah, and I'm not getting frustrated the way I would have done 6 months ago about some bits and pieces.
That's so important. I think we one of the previous chats that I had was and for the benefit of people watching, it's with Alan. I can't remember the episode number off the top of my head, but Alan talked about his experiences of OCD, that he was able to retrospectively pinpoint something like 20-25 years earlier when the first symptoms arrived.
Yeah.
But he didn't actually realize that he had OCD until the point of retirement, or just before retirement. So there's a clear parallel with you. And I think what's really interesting about that is it sends a very clear message out to people that it's never too late, irrespective of whether or not there's a label that or that gets attached to your experiences. It's never too late to be able to kind of, I guess, embrace that in a different way, or kind of redirect yourself so that you can be more at peace. You can have more comfort yourself and have a kind of overall sense of well-being.
No, I agree. I think you're right. And this is the human, we kind of talk casually about the human condition and so on. And okay, so we grow up in a framework where there are, I don't know whether trope is the right word, but there are these things which these phrases that are basically strings of words which become embedded in our thinking broadly, right, culturally. So, the fact that we've got a monarch, that's just part of our cultural DNA. This is just our framework set in these ways. But then we hear things like it's dog eat dog out there. It's a jungle. People are selfish. People are competitive, and all this kind of stuff. Which I've always felt. I've always felt a lot of this is just utter bullshit, quite frankly. And I remember in my sixth form, um, in my sixth form, in down periods in down periods, there was lots, quite a few of the boys in my sixth form talk like that about what they're going to do at university, what they're going to do when they leave school, and they would say, "It's a dog eat dog world out there." It is, literally these cliches, and you see this again and again and again, just coming up on social media. I use social media a lot. That people frame their entire, what can you expect about humanity? We're beyond hope because we're greedy, we're mean, we're competitive, and all this kind of stuff. And it's just nonsense. We're not like that at all. But because these are words which establish themselves in our heads, they become our reality, and we don't challenge our words in our heads. I don't know, I haven't got the language to describe this very well, and it's very easy. And so I think broadly in our political experience in Britain since, well, in fact, most of my adult life, all of my life really, it's all of our lives. I think largely our narratives have been driven by people who are kind of a bit angry, a bit nasty, a bit annoying, a bit rather right wing. But this just fits a narrative which suits oligarchy, royalty, and all the rest of it. And by and large, nice people just fit into this because they don't want to argue. We don't want to argue with the status quo. And as long as you've got a job, as long as you've got your family, you can find solid sustenance in that. But within all of that, it reduces the amount of space which individuals have to be themselves, really. So I'm going down a weird track here because I never really thought about this, but people get a job and they conventionally do all of that. And they might find themselves in work for 30 years, unable to say things that they really feel and think about, which means they can't develop themselves because their workplace does not allow that, because you've got to behave in a particular way. And the same thing happens wherever you go, really, in society. And I think fundamentally humans are designed to be pastoral creatures that enjoy each other's company and support each other, look after each other, and do creative things, music, arts, sports, running, physical stuff, intellectual stuff, in a non-competitive. If it's competition, it would be competition in a kind of non-competitive way. I don't know whether I'm making any sense, but in a like exercising the muscles without feeling I've got to be the winner, and then admiring the winner for being more accomplished, more skilled, more refined, more whatever, but not resenting the winner and not feeling in the shadow or put down because somebody's better than I am.
Yeah.
And our life just doesn't allow this to happen by and large. And so the whole idea of investigating your feelings and your interactions with the world, whatever age you are, carry on doing it, and don't die without, don't go to your deathbed without feeling as though you're comfortable with yourself and what's going on around you. Really, that's what it's about, I think.
I think that's such an important message. Such an important, you've got to challenge that.
Yeah.
If you can see it in yourself, you've got to challenge it, because you will end up feeling better off for it. So the next question I have is, it's traditionally it's how has your relationship with your mental health evolved? But I think you've already kind of given us some sort of some pointers on that.
Yeah.
I'd like to frame it slightly differently for you, knowing our kind of the conversation that you and I have had pre-recording.
Yeah.
You've mentioned specifically the kind of development or the impact of PTSD.
Yeah.
For you. Would you mind talking about where that came from? Give us a bit of context on that and how that affects you.
Yeah. Okay. So I had a background. By the time I was in my mid-30s, I had quite a wide-ranging professional background, but I'd done a lot of hospitality work, and I'd managed a nightclub in the West in Mayfair, and I'd been involved in some in being a bartender, waiter. I've worked in some kitchens and a maitre d', which is kind of manager, in some very busy restaurants, quite high profile restaurants in London and in Manchester as well. And I knew that I loved catering because all the good things it does. It's all about people. My whole view is it's all about people being happy and enjoying the world really, and to do with flavour, smell, scent, everything, all this kind of very eclectic stuff. And I signed a lease on a pub in 1995, which was a Tide pub. And a Tide lease is, people still don't know this, but basically back then in 1995, the majority of pubs in Britain were owned by pub companies who rent the individual pubs out to individuals under a thing called a Tide lease. So you pay rent, the individual lessee pays rent, and then buys a quantity of their supplies, generally beer, but can be more, can be everything, through the freeholder supply chain.
Yeah.
This stuff is not allowable in EU law, and it's not allowable anywhere else, but it's allowable in Britain because we live in a feudal framework, which I didn't understand at the time. So I signed this lease. I turned this pub from a rundown boozer into a multiple award-winning pioneering pub, and learned a lot about everything to do with civil society and law and a whole bunch of stuff I never expected to do. I expected to take on a business, make it really busy, probably do another one, maybe do a few, and be successful at that by applying all my knowledge into this one thing. So the PTSD comes along, where very early on in this relationship I had with this pub and this pub company, is I began to realize that the pub company was basically shafting me or intending to shaft me, and that the contract I'd signed was a pretty much identical contract to the contracts which tens of thousands of other people had signed as Tide lessees as well. And if it was happening to me, I've always had this dictum. Is a dictum the right thing? I've always thought, if you're experiencing this, you're not alone. Loads of other people are experiencing it as well. So the PTSD comes a long time down the line, in that having got involved with this pub, which is very busy and in principle very successful, I'd end up in having rent reviews, and the rent review situation, the pubcos. I mean, it is slightly mind blowing. Pubcos, when they'll put the pressure on and send bailiffs in to, if you're having an argument with the pub company, if they think they've got any legal leverage with you whatsoever, they'll threaten you with, let's say we're going to change the locks unless you. I don't want to go into all that because it'll go on forever. But essentially, I found myself standing. I'm a nice guy, right? I'm a nice guy. I found myself standing up to bailiffs in my pub on a Friday evening, typically, because Friday's the busiest time. They send the bailiffs on a Friday. And the bailiffs stand there and say, right, we're going to close the pub. We're impounding all the materials here, all the goods, because this guy Dodds owes X amount of rent and stuff like this. It's entirely spurious, right? And I found myself standing up to these people, and I find these things incredibly stressful. I mean, incredibly stressful. And I would be taking photographs of these guys, demanding their name, doing all the stuff you have to do, and learning how to protect myself legally in these situations. Which in other circumstances, I know of licensees who've ended up giving bailiffs 2,000 or 3,000 quid to go away, that if they just stood the ground, the bailiffs had no legal grounds to do. Because in the end, it's about fronting it out. And then years later, pub's gone, right, a whole load of stuff, had a couple of mental breakdowns along the way. Years later, I realized that in some what I would consider quite normal situations, if I get excited about something, or if I get a shock, it might be a loud bang or something like this, I get this cascade of emotions and fight or flight reactions in my body that I can't stop, and it's PTSD. It's this inappropriate response to stimuli, which are not stimuli really, and the trigger for it, I'm sure, was these events of standing up to an immovable object and doing stuff I really hated doing. And I don't know whether there's any clinical. I've not. I show all the signs of PTSD. I haven't had an official diagnosis, and maybe I could just come across as some kind of, country remedy guy who just thinks he's got all these things. But um, if you take the ADHD and the PTSD things together, I've moderated my behavior, or self-medicate is a very bad way of putting it. But I've understood some of my behaviors and responses, and I've dealt with them in ways which manage them quite well.
Mm.
But reading about this in detail and then contextualizing the way I've managed my behaviors, so I can cope, basically just so I can cope. I realize I've been quite aware of myself, and I've been able to moderate that. And I've always had a dialogue with a doctor. I'm quite good at, if I'm feeling weird, I'm quite good at going to a doctor and saying I'm depressed or whatever. And so the PTSD is that. I don't want to be, I don't want to trivialize it or anything, because it's a really I have not suffered bombings and terrible graphic events, which of course PTSD can immediately be understandable as an aftermath of. But I think it's worth understanding that PTSD can come from things which appear to be normal life events, but it's not normal to be standing up to a fucking bailiff
No.
who's trying to impound your stock and telling a bar full of customers who think they're in a fantastic successful business that they're going to close the business down.
No,
This is
it's not
terrible
at
stuff.
all. And I don't, there's two things. One is the label. You don't have an official diagnosis. To a large extent, it doesn't matter, because the
No,
feelings don't change, right? And
no,
you
absolutely.
have identified that something isn't right for you. You have sought to learn more, to be able to help you to respond differently in certain situations, or to
Yeah,
manage that challenge, um, which I think is really important. And the other thing is, with the PTSD, you're right. Like, people immediately associate kind of there's the visual imagery of warfare, isn't there, with
yeah,
PTSD,
yeah,
and all of those kind of things. And it's not to diminish that at all, but things PTSD, I think it can affect people on different scales,
yeah,
different kind of catalysts along the way. So for me, for example,
yeah.
when I left corporate land, I live in the town that the headquarters is in, and it took me nearly 4 years before I could. Every time I needed to drive up to the M4, I had to go past the office. It took me nearly
That's
four
really
years of doing that before I could actually drive past it without going, "Oh God," and getting flashbacks to.
that's really interesting, because I've just identified a similar thing with me as well. I've never thought of before. Yeah, like being in a place that resonates with terrible experiences. Yeah, and moving to get away from it. I've done that twice, and I never thought of it in that frame. Actually, yeah,
Yeah, and I'm not. That's not stopped me from sleeping. That's not stopped
you
me disrupting my
yeah,
life. But,
yeah,
I've been hyper aware of that every single time I drove past that building.
yeah.
It had a physical effect on me.
Yeah. No, that's really interesting. But that's a good one, because I think we people can experience that kind of reality in a response in ourselves, and without investigating it, without analyzing it, without looking at it, and just think, oh, well, it's because I had a bad time there, but without thinking beyond that.
Yeah,
You know, I've got my younger son. He won't mind my saying this. He's 22, and and I talk to him a lot about I talk to both my sons about my feelings, and because I don't want them to go through the shit I've been through. I don't want them to be 65 and finding out this kind of stuff. And I think they're better equipped if they understand themselves really well to deal with day-to-day life. Now
yeah,
the younger one says to me stuff like, "I know, Dad," when I told him I was having these emotional breakdowns this year and weeping spontaneously about a memory or about some flashback, you say, "Oh, I never feel like that. I never feel," and there's quite a few times he said, "I never feel like that." and he's got a bit of a job issue. He finds authority a problem, and he doesn't really want to get a job. And I kind of quite understand a job. He's very creative as a musician, and I kind of. But when it comes to paying rent, he's not bothered. But you know, there's a reality. We have to pay rent.
Yeah.
Um, and so we've had these conversations about, okay, so when you say that, he says, oh, that's interesting. I never feel like that. It never affects me, this kind of pressure. I said, well, perhaps we need to, perhaps you could do with thinking about why does it not affect you? Because I think that's probably you blocking off your emotional need. I'm sorry. I think this might help generally. When I used to get very bad eczema when I was a kid, and that happened when I came to England. Never had eczema in Nigeria, got it in England, and I think that probably was a psychological thing. Probably, I did all the. This is not uncommon either. Loads of skin tests to see what the allergies are for, and you get nothing. You're not apparently allergic to anything other than weirdly sometimes the microporous tape itself, the glue on that.
Yeah.
So I had very bad eczema as a kid, and when I was coming up to my A levels, which metaphorically is a little bit like my younger son now, he's 22, he's a bit older than that, the way he's been behaving, is I was having a really great time in the spring, and my eczema was getting really bad. And I was thinking to myself, there's something, what is going on here? You've got a girlfriend, the weather's great, you're going out enjoying yourselves, you're doing all kinds of interesting, cycling a lot and doing all kinds of interesting stuff. And I thought, well, your A levels are coming up fairly soon, maybe, and you're not doing any revision whatsoever. Maybe it's because you're not preparing yourself for what might be a terrible thing. So for the first and only time in my life, I made a timetable, and I even knew myself then, and I gave myself time off to cycle to get my energy out, and I passed. And for 2 weeks, I worked really hard, stuck to this timetable, and I passed my A levels reasonably well. But within 2 or 3 days, my eczema almost completely cleared up. So I had no. It was my putting a logical thing together that made that actually. So that's a very early understanding of myself, and I've never managed to stick to a timetable since. But it was a very manifestly clear response, physical response to my changing my behavior. And Ed doesn't prepare himself for this. He goes out and has a great time all the time, and then he says, "I don't feel like that."
Yeah.
And I think this is possibly emblematic of what happens to loads and loads of people. We just don't pay attention to the minutiae of our behavior. Sorry, I've run off on one.
That's actually really interesting, because that actually takes us into the next question. I think that's a really good example of if you like, the sort of light bulb moment where you suddenly put two and two together and go, oh, hang on a minute.
There was literally nothing wrong.
Because I've prepared for these exams, and because I've structured my time, the knock-on effect of that is that my eczema has disappeared. I mean, can you think of any sort of other examples, I guess, of equivalent moments where you've suddenly realized that something works for you, or that something doesn't work for you, or that you need?
I've got two key moments actually. There's one. This is about the mental health stuff. Excuse me. I managed a nightclub. Got together with the head chef, who was a woman. We bought a flat together. I left the nightclub to refurbish the flat. At the peak of my career, left the nightclub to do something I'd never done before, which was basically retrofit a flat and build a garden. Did that really well. We split up, which was really upsetting to me, and I found myself living in not far from where I live now, in New Cross Gate actually, and feeling and by then I was doing landscaping. By then I was a landscaper and working very hard in the home counties, but living in London, and I was watching TV till 3 or 4 in the morning and getting ridiculous, and then getting up at 7 and going to the home counties and working all the time, and feeling very emotionally distressed and fraught, and a bit depressed. And incidentally, that was 1994, and I stopped watching TV then, and I stopped buying a subscription to a Guardian, because I felt these things were making me more depressed as well. And there was a doctor's down the road, and I made an appointment to say I was feeling distressed and depressed and loose and aimless and stuff like this. And this very interesting doctor said to me that, would you be interested in doing some engaging in some psychotherapy? They did group sessions there, and I said yes. And so I was booked in for it would be called an assessment session. So I met him as a GP, but there was going to be an assessment session. And it was an evening, it was a day in October, and I remember walking down this hill. It's called Erlanger Road in Telegraph Hill in southeast London. And it was a beautiful morning, and I kind of metaphorically was skipping down the hill. The sun, the leaves were dropping. It was a beautiful morning, and I got to the doctor's and went in and said at the counter, "Oh, I'm here to see Doctor whatever." And these women looked at each other and said, "Oh, didn't you get the message?" And I said, "No, what message?" "Oh, he wasn't able to come in today, so we thought we left you a telephone message to say he couldn't make it. We need to reschedule the appointment." So within 3 minutes of walking down the hill thinking, la, 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 I'm making progress in my life, I was walking up the hill feeling like it was a dark day, like I was incredibly depressed. I found every step difficult to put. And I was thinking then, what is going on with you here? Because you were on top of the world literally less than 5 minutes ago, and now you can't see the top of the hill. And that was one, which made me, think about all this kind of stuff. And then the next thing, years and years and years later, is in finding the pub companies, and in my pub in Camberwell, pardon me, with children, with my partner who's now my ex, going shopping, and not being able to cope with shopping, going to Sainsbury's, going to a supermarket, and Lou would say to me, "Can you go and get some washing powder or whatever, something like that?" And I'd stand in the aisle of these walls of different products, and completely freeze, just lock out, unable to cope. And I'd find she'd come and stand in front of me and go, "Are you all right? What's going on?" Like this, and I was just completely having a fucking mental breakdown, basically, without being aware of it. And it was the problem of trying to make a choice. Should it be this softener? Should it be that one? There's 8 of them. There's 10 of them, and this, and it just would send me, information overload. I was having a mental breakdown. It was quite. If she had not been there saying to me, "Hello, hello," I would have just been one of those guys standing there looking weird.
Yeah, and it's like there's the cumulative effect of everything that's kind of brewing away under the surface, and then choosing which fabric softener to go for is the straw that breaks the camel's back. Something as banal as that is
absolutely
tipping point. That's
absolutely. And that then I'd think, well, right now I really should go and see a doctor about this, because there's something very seriously wrong with you. You.
Yeah.
Wow. And I went to my doctor, right? This is a quick one. And I told him all this stuff. I got to a point where I was feeling suicidal. I was having these urges, and I was fighting this pub committee. I thought I'd be made bankrupt. It was really grim. And I told him I'm feeling suicidal, and he said, "Well, he gave me this multiple choice questionnaire, which he pulled out of a little filing cabinet he had on his desk, with, and he sat there while I filled it in, and when I gave it back to him, he was called Dr. Virgie. He was a lovely guy. He took a couple of minutes collating it and adding up all the figures, and he said, "Well, it's not good."
Yes, I know. I came in for that.
He said, "It's not good. You need help." He was like that. But he had a way. I think he gauged me very well, because he knew. I think he always knew that he could tap into my residual sense of humor, and then he prescribed me some SSRIs, but said, "You're not taking those." Sorry, he said, "Would you be interested in talk therapy?" And I said, "Yes, I would." And he said, "You're not taking talk therapy without getting some drugs as well." So I was on citalopram for about 7 years. And incidentally, I was on a very low dose, and once years later, I tried 20 milligrams instead of 10, and it sent me slightly mad. One pill, didn't sleep for 5 days.
Wow.
Citalopram, yeah. But anyway, so yes, these things. And one thing that I've always been good at doing is, if I think you're feeling like you want to kill yourself, that is not right. You need to get yourself down to a doctor and talk about it.
Mm.
Don't just put it to one side and think it'll go away.
I,
Uh,
I don't for a second want to appear to trivialize that feeling, but if there was like a physical equivalent of it, it would be, do you know how in the world of COVID, right? You become hyper aware that people
yeah,
around you have got COVID, and if you have a slight sniffle, you think, have I got COVID? Or
yeah,
if you take a bite of something, go, oh, can I taste that fully?
yeah,
Oh, and you kind of don't realize that it's actually creeping up on you
yeah,
until you can't taste anything and you feel absolutely wretched. And then you kind of think to yourself, okay, so for the last 3 days, I have been feeling really crap. I've kidded myself. And then as you're coming out the other side of it, things like your taste returns. Every
yeah,
bite something, it's like, has it come back? Am I just kidding myself? It's come back. Can I taste it?
yeah,
Can I taste that salty?
yeah,
There's a parallel there with that feeling, isn't there? That where
yeah. I think so.
you come to feel like the way that the way you're reacting and interacting with the world is just the way that it's always been, and it
Yeah,
takes something happening that
yeah,
kind of makes you go, oh, this isn't right. I need to get some help here. And it could be any number of different things that are the
mm,
choosing fabric softener and that being overwhelming,
yeah,
any number of other things. Just something needs to get through to you
mm.
to help you go, oh, it shouldn't be like
That's a really interesting one. So, if you prescribe, excuse me, sorry, if you prescribed a medication and you read are they called the contraindicators at the beginning? There's just a list of stuff, and it doesn't resonate at all.
mm,
And usually somewhere in there it'll say could. This is very common. Usually, could say side effects could be diarrhea or could be constipation. Yeah, I think, well,
yeah.
that's interesting. It could be either. So I once was prescribed a drug called Seroxat, which is Seroxat, and it's been withdrawn. This is back in 2000, and I took maybe 3 days in a row, three pills, and it's an early SSRI. It was before Prozac, and it became known in the States for being. It was called something like the killer drug because it made, by and large, it moderated people's behavior very well and helped their depression. But in some people with outliers, it made them feel horrifically suicidally depressed
Mm,
or furious and angry, and they'd go out and kill people. And I was taking Seroxat very briefly, and I read these counterindicators, and then I didn't sleep for 5 nights. This was the lowest of anything I've ever gone through.
mm,
My kids were very young. I was really frustrated about the pub, and then I read the contraindicators 3 days later, and it was like alarm bells ringing then, because at the beginning it was just benign. 3 days later, everything except the diarrhea and the constipation I was
mm,
exhibiting. And I constantly wanted to, really weird, I constantly wanted to climb up on a roof and throw myself off a roof. I couldn't work out how to climb up the roof, but I wanted to be on a roof. I constantly was envisaging myself jumping off a roof. I mean, not stopping 24 hours a day. It was really horrific. Then
mm,
I rang 111. Is it 111? And they said, "Oh, you mustn't stop taking them now. You must go and get an appointment with your GP. GP can see me for a week." I was like, "No, no, I will kill myself. I will do." Anyway, it's just one of those benign things. Yes, it seems fine now, but then 3 days later, it's like alarm bells ringing.
yeah.
And
But
in between all of
again,
that,
you have throughout a lot of what you've talked about, um, you have demonstrated over and over again how vitally important it is to have that self-awareness
yeah, yeah,
to kind of clock that something's not right, but then also to have, and I say this from a position of experience, to have the self-respect to go and do something about it, because I've fallen into the trap before now,
Yeah.
not believing that it's worth me doing anything about it.
Sorry, sir, you didn't catch me. Fall into a trap.
So I've been guilty in the past of not valuing myself enough
Yeah,
to do something constructive about it, and that's done is prolonged the pain,
absolutely.
difficulty. But
And
it
it's
feels
really
like
common, isn't it?
yeah, it feels like from the way you talk about things, it feels like you either have always had that sense that you know something's not right and that something needs to be done, or you've kind of developed that sense.
You see, sorry, I think that might be something to do with ADHD, but I'm not sure because everything that I realize is ADHD now. My dad used to talk to me a lot about lots of stuff when I was a kid, lots and lots and lots and lots of stuff. He did a really good job as a parent, I think. I've tried to do this with my sons as well. And when I was at junior school, I remember a conversation with him. This is probably over several conversations anyway, where I had this experience in class of the teacher asking a question of the class and everybody just sitting there like mute.
Mm.
And I was, sometimes I'd know the answer to the question, other times I didn't. But whichever way, I was always waiting for a cue from somebody else to say, "Please, miss, I think about." And I talked to my dad about this, and he said, "Well, Mark, don't worry about it. If you're wrong, if you think you know the answer, just put your hand up and say it because you'll find that every." I will get emotional about this because he was so good at these kind of things because he was a teacher. And I think he probably had ADHD as well. He would say, "You will find that everybody else in the room is feeling the same way that you do. And he had this lived experience from being a teacher, right? And and you will find that they will think, thank heaven somebody, Mark, has put the hand up and said it. And if you're wrong, it doesn't matter if you're wrong because you'll have learned something, but everybody else will have learned something as well. Because the teacher will then say what the answer is rather than these awkward silences and stuff like that. And that, loads of little things that my dad taught me like that stuck with me all through my life. And I think that's I've always felt that that's partly my objectivity coming from a black country to a white country as a very early experience and being completely bamboozled by what I was experiencing here. Plus, this narrative my dad helped me describe my experiences through by being a bit objective about that. I said earlier, I have honestly everything I've ever done in my life as an adult. I've framed when I've had an idea. I think this will work. Setting up a pub, doing this, I think it'll work. I've had this unbound confidence in my knowing the outcome of my actions would be positive if I could make those actions happen. That people would make the pub busy. Well, I've had people around me telling me, "You're mad. It'll never work." What makes you think it's going to work here? Why, if it's such a good idea, why hasn't somebody done this already? Well, because no one's done it yet. That's what, and I've also, right, I set up a pub in Southeast London. I had all the tools, I had all the experience to be able to do that. So I wasn't exactly stretching my neck, but on the grounds that I met a guy, I bumped into a guy. I was living in Southeast London, and in wanting to go and have a nice pint somewhere, I found myself in Westbourne Grove having a pint at a pub in Westbourne Terrace. And I saw a guy I recognised from like tube trains, whatever, not tube Southeast London, but buses, whatever, Southeast London, and said to him, and he said, I was looking at you thinking the same. Where do you live? New Cross Gate, whatever. And what the fuck are you doing over here? And he was like, well, all the pubs are shit, aren't they? So I thought, if there's me, there's another guy. There must be thousands of us. There must be thousands of us. Do a pub that's really good in Southeast London. It'll be really busy, and it was. And all the way along the line, everybody around me was going, "You're crazy. It'll never work." And blah blah blah. And I'm not a genius. And sorry. And it feels like a superpower and all this. And I always put it down to my dad saying, "If you think something, there's a million other people thinking the same." But I think this ties with the idea of the superpower of ADHD and seeing things and whatever. But in the end, it's about being able to put stuff together on a logical framework.
Mm.
Sorry, I ran off on one there. But everything I do, everything is interconnected, and this is one of our problems. Touching back on the beginning, which is society tries to make us be linear, which we aren't normally as creatures, and it resists any behavior which is outside of this straight path, and that straight path makes you shut off intellectually, emotionally, physically, everything in tunnels you down, which I think makes you feel ill.
Mm.
But then that's normal. You know, that experience, if that is your life experience, you don't know that you're feeling ill's probably not the right word. You don't know that you're not exploring your interests, your ideas.
Yeah, you don't know that it could be better.
Yeah, your normal is your normal.
Yeah.
You know, I had this conversation with two women I spent quite a long time with, monogamous serial monogamy relationships, saying, I think that we are used to feeling unhappy in our relationship, and we feel comfortable with it. And it'd be like, what on earth are you talking about? Well, we're not, we're not really getting on very well, are we? And maybe it feels to me like we can't see outside of that and make more of it. I think perhaps our expectations are that this is the way relationships are. I didn't resolve these conversations, but I think it's very common that people put up, how many times do you hear of, I mean, typically it'll be a woman whose husband dies and then the woman becomes herself for the first time in 40 years, 50 years. It's very common. Perhaps less so now that men don't wear bowler hats and, do you know what I mean? But that kind of thing. And it's again, that people are narrowed down into areas of existence that are much narrower than their innate creative needs
Mm.
demand, but those needs don't get attended to. So you shut down bits of your existence, so you're not feeling frustrated and awful all the time, and then you end up in a metaphorical tunnel vision of I'm going to vote Brexit. I'm going to find freedom by voting for the Reform Party or something like that. Let's vote for the least likely to help us people on the planet, because they're just like us and they're not. Sorry.
That you've whether by design or by chance, you've kind of taken us into the final question, which is, if somebody came to you and they're going through something similar, they've had similar sort of experiences to you, what's the most important thing that they could do? And I don't know that that's your answer, but what you've just said there about, having the belief that if it's a problem for you, then it's probably a problem for lots of other people as well, and
Yeah,
not alone.
I do. I do think that's I do think it's really important to understand that, and it's not a case of it's not a case of trying to take away anyone's individuality. But bottom line is we are just animals. We're just herd creatures, and we've got a physical being which is pretty much identical to everybody else's, and so a form of pressure affecting one physical being will likely, when encountered by another physical being, result in similar outcomes, and that can be depression, confusion, whatever, dissatisfaction. And if you understand that, that can help you feel like, well, I'm not alone. I mean, I've helped dozens and dozens of tied publicans who have had a terrible fight going on with their pub company, where they felt suicidal or depressed or trapped, very serious stuff. And what broadly what I've learned from my general experience of engaging with people like this. I've got a blog. It's called "They Got Me Over a Barrel." I was involved very deeply in establishing some legislation called the Pubs Code, and I'm quite well known inside the pub sector for being a shouty, annoying disruptor for the status quo. And so, quite a few people have found me who are publicans by searching something like some keywords to do with their situation, and they find my blog, and then they get in touch with me, right? So that's what it boils down to. And I found that I'm not very, and I'm not being modest here. I'm not very good. I'm very good. I'm very gregarious, very social. I'm very good at signposting people to people who are experts in an area of law or whatever that can help them. But I'm not very good at advising directly, because my legal knowledge is a little bit patchy, and laws change. So, but what I'm very good at doing is finding out how they feel, and then and with pretty much without exception. There are a couple of exceptions. They've all felt that it's happening to them alone, because their area manager from their pub company always says, no one else is talking like this. It's just you. You're making bad decisions. You're doing whatever, and they feel terrible about themselves. They feel as though they're failing. They feel as though they're responsible for all the faults, all the problems of the potential bankruptcy, being evicted, losing their life savings and everything else, when they're part of a systemic problem, which is essentially, and this is not to be political, it's true, that they've become indentured labor for a feudal framework, which it's not a lord, it's a capitalist, extractive, rentier system. And they don't know that, they can't see outside of that because they're stressed. And again and again and again, it's the same things. And what makes them feel better, excuse me, sorry, and what makes them feel more capable is hearing somebody, me, I mean, it happens to be me, it could be anybody who tells them this with authenticity. You're not alone. You're dealing with these venal extractive mechanisms. Don't try to get inside the head of your area manager or the pub company, because none of it makes any sense, because it's just a machine. And if they can once they can get their head around that, it changes their dynamic in their relationship with their pub company, and it helps them advocate for themselves in a way which they couldn't do before, because before they were always being threatened and not standing up to the bully. And when they stand up to the bully, I mean, because this is where my PTSD came in, because I was standing up to the bully all the time, and yeah, and incidentally, I was evicted in 2011 after I lost an interview, and it's now 2014, 2023, 2024 when I started to realize my emotional damage as a result of what happened then is only really fully come out 10, 12 years down the line. It's taken that long for me. I went out and I kind of campaigned and proselytized. It's a terrible system. It's wrong, wrong, wrong. I was quite high profile in this level, and I thought that was cathartic. I thought that was healing my emotional me, but actually it was another version of my fighting back against the system, and it's only been in the last 2 years. I didn't say this earlier. I could have brought this up earlier when I said I've got ADHD. This recent revelation, the sum of it is I've realized that my emotional damage I've been dealing with in the last year, having felt that I'd dealt with it around about 2012, 2013, when I was newly evicted. I was homeless for 3 years. But I've managed to contact, I think, I, of all people who am aware of these things, and I've gone out there in public and said I've had emotional issues, I've had mental health issues as a result of coming up against the pub communities, to then find I'm having, hysterical, it's a word, hysterical, emotional, crying breakdowns on my own, emotional stuff, which is actually unraveling stuff that happened 13, 14 years ago. If it can happen to me, again, it can happen to lots and lots of people, because my behavior responses are as a result of my being a biological being. We behave in ways which protect ourselves that we're not aware of. Like a rabbit and staring at headlights. Keep still. We have these responses which are just psycho-emotional, whatever, psychophysical. I don't know what the terms are. Sorry, I've gone off on one again. And yeah, we're all vulnerable to this kind of stuff as humans. And if you understand that, so sorry, to summarize that, saying these, and another one, communities who want to save their pubs. There's a whole load of stuff around, and I know this area inside out because I spent so long researching it, being with communities who want to save the pubs, being with publicans who have been ruined by pubcos, post office scandal 2.0. This is what this is about. Communities who want to save the pubs using the Localism Act, community right to bid, assets of community value legislation, they all, by and large, all feel very fearful. They want to save their pub. You've got 30, 40, 50, 60 people in a room at the point at which they have to trigger their legal right to make a bid to try and save that pub. At that point, they're all thinking, shit, we don't know what we're doing. We don't know how to do this. Is the pub viable? It has closed. The pub company selling is not viable. And now these are ordinary people. They're all extraordinary with themselves when it comes to this situation of having to take on bricks and mortar, raise money, mobilize, buy a pub, become responsible for it, trade it, so they can just get a nice pub at the end of the street. At that point, when they've got to trigger all this legal framework, they're all thinking, shit, this is dreadful. We don't know what to do. We don't know what we're doing. And if one person stands up in the room and says, guys, you coming together, listing the pub as an asset for community value, and being here and turning up is evidence that it's a viable pub.
Mm.
You just need to understand that. And the rest of it's technical. And everybody in the room goes, bloody hell, I never thought of it like that. It's fantastic. And then it gives them a load of energy because they can then believe in themselves. As on the individual level, speaking to a tenant who's feeling threatened and crushed and hunted by a pub company exec, and it is a horrible experience being like that, they then feel agency because they realize they're not alone.
Mm.
And these are our common experiences and our common responses to threat and the unknown, the taking risk and so on. Because in our linear reality, we're not supposed to take risks. No, even though the world doesn't, even now we can't even have a linear reality anymore because of what's been going on with the economy and the global everything. You don't just you get born, you go to school, you have a family, you buy. People can't pay the rent. People, you can't live a normal life anymore unless you've really well off. Right, there you are. I ran off again.
But what you're saying is essentially you're not alone, and the more
we are
willing
all in it together
with other people, the more likely
yeah.
it is you're gonna come through.
We're all in it together.
Yeah,
unless the person that's saying it is unless the person who's saying it is David Cameron, right?
Yeah, let's not go there.
But that's why it's so compelling, though, because we innately we feel that we are in it together,
yeah,
because literally we are. Yeah,
and that's with these conversations as well. Each one of these conversations that we have that we can put out there, it's going to show. I hope it's going to show
yeah,
someone that they're not the only person that's ever struggled
yeah,
with stuff. There are other people that are struggling with it, and that
absolutely.
itself can give them some strength and some energy to do something constructive to help themselves. And for that, Mark, we've got through the 5 questions. I just wanted to say thank you for sharing your experiences, for being so open.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity as well.
It's my pleasure. When somebody is willing to come forward and share their story to help other people feel less alone, to destigmatize mental health concerns. If one person sees this and it helps them to take a constructive view on how they can help themselves, then it's worth its weight in gold as far as I'm concerned.
Actually, I'll try and be very quick. I don't want to extend this anymore, but the world's full of self-help books. I think the biggest self-help that can be is if you know in yourself, it's worth, if you're feeling inadequate or crushed or flawed or scared or terrified or whatever, anxious, it's worth just going to your doctor, trying to talk about it to friends if you can, or going to your doctor and saying, I feel like this, without any self-doubt. It's worth just doing that, right? Just cracking that seal that makes it difficult to go out and do that. I think to destigmatize that one bit, just take the step. If you feel like this, mental note, if I feel like that again, I'm going to go to the doctor.
Yeah.
And not question it. If I feel terrible like this, I think I've resolved it. If it comes back again, next time I will definitely go to the doctor, irrespective of challenge. I won't try and just make little rules like that, And then things like exercise, systematic, very simple stuff. Look after yourself. Yeah.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Mark, if somebody has seen this conversation and things that you've said have resonated with them, is it okay if they get in contact with you?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. I will, obviously I'll tag you in the LinkedIn post when this goes live. I'll also include a link to your LinkedIn profile in the description of the video as well, so that people can find you if they want to. Again, Mark, thank you for doing this. Really appreciate it. Thank you to everybody who has watched and listened along with this. Two things to say. I guess one is if you could like, share, subscribe, all of the things with social to help spread this a little bit further, that would be massively appreciated. Thumbs up, exactly. And if you have heard this and you feel like you could share some of your experiences by joining in a subsequent chat or a future chat, please don't hesitate to get in touch with me. This only works and this can only keep going if more people come forward to share their experiences. All of my contact details will be in the posts and the description of this as well. So if something that you've heard here makes you feel like, yeah, I could share my story and I think it would help others, don't hesitate to get in touch. In the meantime, all that remains for me to say is thank you once more. We'll be back again in the near future with another episode, trying to drop them every couple of weeks. So keep your eyes out for that. And thanks for joining us. Take care and goodbye.